All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and with me today, I've got a very special guest, Sejal Thakkar. Thanks for joining me today, Sejal.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I don't even know how I found you, how I found your TED Talk, but I watched your TED Talk and listening to you growing up in Chicago and you describing how you experience bias on a firsthand level, growing up in an area where you were uh, um, and I might use the wrong words, but you were a minority in the area and just suffered the bias because of that. Um, I really was drawn to it. I was drawn to it because it's something that I think that we need to talk about because as I go through my life journey, this is one of the things that I realize that I am biased without even understanding that I'm biased just because of whatever, just the things that have happened in my life or the way where you grew up, how you grew up, or where you went to school or bias comes in a lot of different forms. So thank
Yeah,
you.
does.
Thank
It
you.
does. It impacts all of us. It really
Yeah.
does. And it's an area I completely agree with you that people just don't understand. It's not anybody's fault. We just haven't received proper education on it. And so once I started to learn about it, I was like, I'm on a mission to make sure other people do because a lot of times whether we act when we act from a place that we're not even aware that it's happening, it can
Mm-hmm.
interfere with our relationships with people without us even knowing about it,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And the thing that I think, and let's start, because I'll get going. So let's start first for the people that haven't heard. Give us a synopsis of you growing up and some of the things that you endured and had to deal with, and then talk about your background as an employment lawyer and how this kind of gelled together to bring you to where you are today.
Yeah, so my parents are immigrants from India. They moved here in 1974, and I grew up in a small suburb of Chicago called Elmwood Park. We were the only Indian family in a predominantly Italian neighborhood. My parents came to this country for the same reason that a lot of immigrant families come here is for a better future for their families. So they barely spoke English. They went to work right away. And so, growing up, I dealt with bias on both in the house as well as outside of the house. And in the TEDx talk, I primarily focused in on what I dealt with that was outside of the house. But I just want to explain that this was a lot of this stuff was also going on inside of the house because my parents moved here. They weren't used to the American culture, the people here, the traditions here, all the different religions, and all of that other stuff. And so I was asking why a lot. I was asking, why is this happening? I was asking that at home about, why are you telling me that I can't go outside in the sun because I'm going to get too dark? What's the deal with that? And why are you telling me I can't do this, or that, which is part of the American culture? And I'm growing up here and I love the American culture too. So a lot of asking why at home, a lot of what was going on outside of the house bled into the home because people were, because we were the only Indian family, we stood out. We were different. So I dealt with the harassment and bullying at a pretty young age growing up. And primarily, it was things like name calling, bullying, harassment, exclusive behaviors. There was some, vandalism to our home, a lot of name calling, and all of that stuff was happening. And as a child growing up with sort of already feeling like you're living on the fence of being between two cultures and then having to take that on, it was a pretty tough childhood. And there wasn't a lot of support there, so there was, several things that sort of led me to doing that talk. And being on the victim side of bias and having gone through that harassing behavior, I started noticing in myself that I was starting to act out. I was speaking up, I was fighting back, and I was getting in trouble at school. All of this stuff was going on. And, I basically had a decision to make. Am I going to continue to am I going to let this situation, which is something I have no control over, be something that defines me? And if that happened, it's not going to be good, right?
Yeah.
Or am I going to change the situation? And just kind of had to go through that journey on my own. And I've always had a social justice aspect to me. This is from when I was a child, because I felt like an outsider for most of my childhood. So when I pick up on that anywhere I'm at, I can pick up when somebody's feeling excluded. I can pick up on that. I'm hypersensitive to it. And it's always been my thing to make people feel like they belong. And that's just something that I've always done. I've always gone out of my way to make sure that I had diversity in my circle of friends. I was exposing myself to different cultures, different religions, just because I wanted to understand these different perspectives. So having gone through it, it was obviously very horrible, right? It was a tough situation. I knew I was going to go to law school early on. It was something I just knew, and I never questioned it. I think I was around 8 or 9 when my dad told my mom at the dinner table one time, she's going to be a lawyer. She asked way too many questions. and it was, and he was right. I did. And I still ask a lot of questions. But so the interesting thing, though, is this is what you and I were talking about before we went live, is you would think after hearing my story that I was probably going to be there representing the victims, right?
Yeah.
But once I got in there, I actually ended up representing leaders and supervisors and managers in cases that dealt with harassment, discrimination. So now these were the people that were accused of harming other people. So now I'm on the other side. And it was, I call that the paradox of my story, because that's the twist where I feel like that's really where I got to see how bias impacts all of us in different ways. And I don't think I would have been able to see that perspective had I not had that twist in my story.
Yeah. I've got to believe that it was, as we were talking earlier, it was good for you to be able to get to know some of those people and understand their situation from the other side, to really get the full 360-degree view of bias in those situations.
100% agreed. Well, first of all, and I had to go through a really tough part of that journey of really checking my own biases and really understanding what they were and how they might interfere with my ability to stay neutral in these cases or to advocate for the best interest of my client. So I had to do the work myself. So I'm not out there preaching or talking about anything that I have not personally done the hard work and still continue to do every single day of my life. This is the thing about understanding your own biases. It's not a one-time situation. It's a lifelong journey, and you have to just commit to doing the work, but it's completely 100% worth it, because once you understand what bias is and you realize that it's not something that we're trying to get rid of, it's not that we're, it's a bad thing. It's just a part of who we are because of what we've gone through in our lives, what we've experienced, and the world views that we've been, exposed to in our life. Once you understand that and you take that first step of understanding what your own hidden beliefs are or unconscious biases are, then you can put into place some simple strategies to help you mitigate that. And that's really the key. It's not like there's going to be this one point where you're going to say, I'm bias free or I've got it under control. It changes all the time, just like life changes all the time, right?
Yes. I think that would be a bold statement if anyone was able to say that they were bias free or that they weren't biased about anything, because I think at the depth of that, you could say someone was biased about not being biased if we really thought about it long enough.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, when you go and when you hear examples, and I hear examples, and I believe that when you and Andrew Deutsch talked, he was talking about resumes, and this is something that I can remember doing when I was in the position where I was hiring people. And you wouldn't even think about it, but you were doing it. You were trying to picture the person because of a name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's if you're not neutral, or if you are neutral even, I don't care. It doesn't really matter. You're just by having a name, you're picturing a person there. That could be 100% wrong. It could be right on. It really doesn't matter. But that little thing
Mhm.
can make a big difference in are you really truly creating the diverse workforce that you want to create? Are you letting something in you or someone else that's screening a resume to wreck that?
Exactly. And especially when you're making those important decisions, like hiring somebody, right?
Yes.
I mean, we make thousands of decisions every single day. We're basically on autopilot. We're not even, we
Yeah.
think we're being conscious and intentional. It's like not even 10% of the time, right? We're basically on autopilot all day long, which is fine if you're combing your hair, you're putting your makeup on, you're tying your shoelaces, you're getting dressed. Nobody wants to think about all those things, right? We just want to do it. We'd be overwhelmed. Right? Our brains would be like that emoji where it's like your brain's kind of go. It's just too much information.
Mm-hmm.
As I said in my TEDx talk, we are processing close to 11 million pieces of information every single second. 11 million, right?
Wow.
And so it's only 50 of that is consciously processed. The rest of it is going into all kinds of buckets into our mind. And then when you see somebody that reminds you of something like that, memory or that belief or that bias is going to get triggered. And now, without even knowing it, and intentions has nothing to do with it, unintentionally, unconsciously, you're going to make snap judgments about that person, and you may not hire them.
Yeah.
Without even knowing it. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's just happening because of that's how what you've been exposed to. That's your hardwiring. And so we want to put some measures in place, especially when we have leaders or people that are making important decisions, that we do what we can to mitigate it. Right. And there's tools now. I mean, we've done a lot in neuroscience over the last decade where there are things that we can do to minimize it. It's never going to be completely bias free. And no one is saying that we need to be, because bias could be a good thing too, right? But I've started to also look at it from the perspective of, if you have a positive preconceived notion towards somebody, right? Now you, without knowing it, could be doing things that are showing that person like affirmations, like you're going to give them more leeway, you're going to give them another opportunity, you're going to let them have that day off that they want, without even realizing that you're not doing it for the rest of your team. And so now unintentionally you're excluding the rest of your team, and you have no idea that you're doing that.
Yeah.
It's
That's a
huge.
great example. That is a great example. It is a great example that happens, and you're doing it. As you said, you don't even realize you're doing it, but you're doing it, and everyone around you sees it.
Yep.
So I don't know if this is something that we could talk about. The tools to measure bias, I think, is a fascinating subject, and maybe we'll get to that. But that I wrote a note down here because I think it's something I would like to cover in a moment. But it is this, when you think about it, there, like you said, bias is not necessarily bad, and in certain situations, it can help you make the right decisions as well. And that's the one thing I think that I love hearing you talk about it. It's not all bad. We have to understand and appropriately not use or use it in to the best way we should. And when you're out, your experience now is so unique because you've seen both sides of this. What did you learn as you started to help to defend people that were in the situation they were accused of bias or harassment or those kind of things?
I learned so much because as I was doing my own work so that I can stay neutral or I can advocate for my clients, as I was doing that work, I also realized that a lot of these people that were doing bad things, right, where the complaint had been filed, a lot of times it was happening because of their unconscious bias, that it wasn't that they were intending to harm somebody else, right? Which you would imagine if somebody files a lawsuit, that there's going to be some evidence that this person intended to harass somebody or intended to discriminate against somebody. That's what we would think. That's what I thought, right?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I became a defense attorney and not a plaintiff's attorney, my thinking was, you know what? If I represent the employer side, they have deeper pockets. And if they've actually done something wrong, then I can help educate and make sure this harm doesn't continue and harm other employees. So that was sort of my thinking going into it, where it's like, okay, I want to take an opportunity where I can help create better workplaces, right? And so what I found in that process was that a lot of times these were well-intentioned people that were really trying to do their best, but they found themselves in situations where they weren't properly educated. They didn't have the skills to navigate through those differences, because the way that I look at it, we're all different from each other, period. We're all been raised differently. We all have different, unique lenses by which we look at the world. We have different religions, different cultures, different traditions. Everything is different unless we live in the same roof. And even then, like I look at my two siblings and I'm like, what? How did we grow up in the same house together, right? So now you have people that are living in different houses, totally different. Some immigrants, some not. Some born here, some not. I mean, and then you put them all in a work environment, and you're like, yeah, we expect you to be a team. It's never going to work. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. You have to give people the skills to navigate through our differences, because we're all different from each other. And inherent in that is going to be some conflict. There's going to be some communication issues. There's going to be some issues with how do we resolve conflict. There's going to be some issues where if there's something that's happening because of your unconscious bias. So now, whether it's a micro affirmation or a microaggression that's resulting from your unconscious bias, people that are observing this need to be able to call you in or educate you about that situation. But people never were receiving that kind of support from their organizations. I mean, I've done this for years. I've been licensed in California. That's why I could say this like loud, screaming off the top of a mountain. And, I've done this since 2003 as an employment lawyer representing management in these cases. And what I've seen is that very few organizations were really supporting their leaders with the proper training and their employees. If they were supporting their leaders, it was that once a year, check the box training.
Yep.
If you work for a really good organization, well, then you got some other, retreats and some other kinds of training. That's not enough. Leaders need to know how to lead by example. Leaders need to know what it means to be civil. What does diversity mean? What does inclusion mean? What does equity mean? What does justice mean? What does microaggressions mean? What do we do? I mean, there's so much that goes into it that there's no way that you can do that unless you educate. And then the problem that really frustrates me is, why do you think you only need to train your leaders and nobody else?
Yes.
Like, that is so frustrating when I try to say that in every single podcast that I do, because I'm like, somebody's going to hear that, because every single person that you have in your organization, either indirectly or directly, affects the culture of that organization. You cannot do this without getting everybody properly educated, trained, and get everybody's buy-in, and then have accountability for every single person, not just your lawyers or your HR or your leaders. It's literally got to be everybody.
That is, I just think about that, and I think about the businesses I've been involved in the past, and I think of just as you said, the diversity in the workforce and just their ability to solve problems, their abilities to work together, how much it would have been enhanced if we would have talked about things like this, if we would have talked about, because, okay, let's be real honest. I'm of the age that we didn't talk about this until the last, 15 years at all. Yeah. At all. I mean, yes, there were the big things that people talked about, discrimination because of race and gender and those kind of things. That's been around a long time. But as we're talking now, it's truly getting to the root of all bias and educating and how to, I guess, tactfully make people aware of it and resolve this to the point that it needs to be resolved. I think it's enlightening to me, because I think it's a great thing for us to do, just from the standpoint of how much it's going to make things just eliminate so many problems that A, we don't know are there, but are there, that are causing us trouble, or B, that are causing us terrible terrible problems
Yeah.
that people could be causing, like you said, without even realizing it.
They weren't even, I mean, the organizations that I've worked with and what I've seen as far as they weren't even talking about discrimination. They were talking about sexual harassment.
Yes.
But they weren't even talking about race, or it was almost the opposite. Don't talk about it. Those are things that are taboo. We're not going to talk about, have those conversations. And we all know, and this goes back to when we're 2 years old, right? You tell a child not to do something, what are they going to do? You have to explain it as far as why is it that we cannot have these conversations, and why do we need to have certain conversations, even if they're uncomfortable? Because we need to talk about these issues and name them. If we don't do that, we can't solve them. You can't solve a problem until you actually name it. So if you can't have a conversation about how systemic racism is in every single system in this country, and you're afraid to have that conversation because it might open up a can of worms, guess what? It's going to be there in your company, whether you like it or not, because you're not addressing it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like we're starting at square one in certain aspects, because I went through law school without any training on unconscious bias. I went a majority of my career representing people not knowing about. Do you think there's something wrong with that? Something majorly wrong with it. So when I started learning about it, I was like, holy crap. Like I got to educate people on this, because this is huge. These things were meant to divide us. How can we unite us if people don't understand what these things are and where it's coming from? I mean, you basically are living a life or having these beliefs that have been fed to you, and you really haven't been given an opportunity to discuss it. Like, I don't even feel like a lawyer these days. I feel like a therapist. I literally do. I feel like a therapist every day.
Yeah.
And it's all about going to companies and creating a space. So we're going to get off of here, and I'm holding a workshop at 4:30 on, systemic racism. And this is what I do for companies. And people want to talk about it. They just want to have a space where we can have a healthy dialogue. Doesn't mean that you and I have to agree on everything. That's not what we're looking for. In fact, we want to create a space where you can have your opinion, I can have my opinion, but we're going to commit to engage in civility in every interaction. Like, that's the commitment that we need, right? That's one of the reasons why I called myself the Chief Civility Officer, is because we don't have to agree on everything. In fact, it's okay if we don't. But we have to commit to one thing, is that we are going to be civil. Yeah. We're going to have respect and dignity for each other's perspectives. Yep. We're going to have for each other's well-being. And that it's not enough, in my opinion, it's not enough to just merely be civil, right? So I'm going to be civil when I interact with you, but I'm going to sit back quietly and silently when something's happening to you that I should be doing something about as a bystander. Mm-hmm. It's also failing to act, when action is warranted. Like, we need people, bystanders, to interrupt these situations that are happening, that we all know are happening. I mean, I did a conference, actually, this is just one example that popped in my head, but this happens to me so often, because the minute I tell anybody what I do for a living, mm-hmm. the stories about horrors of workplace just start spewing out from all directions. Right?
Yeah.
I literally was invited to this conference and basically was told, we're going to introduce you. You tell us a little bit about your story, and then people can ask questions. All I literally did is tell them my job titles, tell them I was an attorney. And the rest of the time, people went around and shared stories about all this crap that was going on at work.
Yeah.
And so then I'm sitting there thinking, like, we all know it's happening. And then what are you doing? What are we all doing about it? And so we need to start when we start seeing this stuff happen early in the progress. I like to call it the uncivil behavior spectrum, right? I think organizations are focused, have been focused on legal compliance. We're going to check the boxes. We're going to provide the annual sexual harassment training because we need to. And I think with the boat that everybody missed was that if it's gotten to the point where there's a law requiring you to do that, that should be the bare minimum that you do, not the only thing you do. That means there is a bigger problem out there, right? And so my approach is, no. We want to empower everybody on when things start to happen, like rude, unprofessional behaviors, when there's a microaggression that happens unintentionally, but it's harmful to somebody. We want to equip every single person in your organization. And how do we address that in a respectful, professional way when it first starts to happen? Because I've heard this over and over again in my career. Sejal, I wish I would have known. If somebody would have told me, I would have stopped saying that joke, or I would have stopped making those comments, or I would have stopped. So let's just kill that excuse. Let's just put people on notice of their behavior. Because if they truly don't want to harm somebody, they're going to stop. Most people will stop.
Yeah.
We're not going to work trying to, make people offended or uncomfortable. We want to go to work and be part of it. Most of us spend so much time at work. This is our work family. These are people we spend most of our time with. We want to have fun when we're around these people. We want to be successful together. So, but if we don't show people how to do that in those situations, they're probably not going to do anything. Or they might handle it the wrong way and then it blows up into something bigger. It turns into a lawsuit. Or they just sweep it under the rug and then it continues to fester and fester and fester until it turns into a lawsuit. So none of those, we want to train people early on. Here's what you do if you're the victim in that situation. Here's what you do when you're the bystander in that situation. And here's what you do when you're being told, when someone points out to you that what you've done has offended them. Here's how you respond. We need to tell that person how to respond too. Right? Because you're going to it's natural. If you were to tell me right now that I was saying something that was offending you, I'm automatically going to get angry or upset or feel defensive. I'm going to feel like, I want to defend myself, right? That's normal. But then I need to be taught, what do I do with those feelings in that moment? How do I respond in the way that aligns with what the organization's values are? Because I'm sick and tired of organizations talking about people first and all of this stuff. It's like, well, what are you doing about it? Yeah. What are you doing? Where are the actions supporting that core value? Right. And oftentimes I'd be surprised if I even got a definition of what they meant by that core value, if they were able to, if the leadership was even able to recall, because I've been plenty of, everything I say comes from my experience. Right. So, but I have plenty of trainings and I've trained thousands of employees over the globe where I've asked leadership, senior leadership, to name the core values of their organization for me, and they're not able to do it. Mm-hmm. So if they're not able to do it, how are they leading by example? You cannot lead a team about your core values unless you know them and you embody them, right? And so for example, I just accepted a position at a venture studio as their Chief Culture Officer. And my first question was like, are you sure you want to bring me on? Because you know what I'm out there talking about. Yeah. And they're like, exactly why we want to bring you on. I'm like, all right then, because I'm going to be challenging and I'm going to make sure that we are walking our talk, because that's what I believe needs to happen. And the other thing I'll just add about that too, it's not about blame or shaming anybody. It's not about calling anybody out. I just want to make that very clear. I'm so sick of hearing the term cancel culture. Like, it's just, can we just get rid of that term altogether, those two words altogether? Because it's not about that. If you understand bias and you recognize that it's normal, it's something that happens to each one of us, then you realize that sometimes your actions or behaviors, if they truly are coming from a place of unconscious bias, and I try to really break that down in my TEDx talk so that people can really understand it from just a perspective that applies to all of us, then you see that we all act from unconscious bias. And it's not about I intentionally want to harm somebody. It's unintentional. It's unconscious. It's about calling that person in and educating them. And so it's something that bystanders really need to be doing, right? It's on the responsibilities on everybody that's observing this type of behavior happening. It's on them. It's not on the person who's the victim of those situations. That person's only responsibility is to take care of themselves and try to get their work done. It's not to educate everybody. It's not, I love how we have great complaint policies and we have all these, legal policies. We need all of that stuff. But it's really about, if you and I are in a meeting and we see that somebody is engaging in microaggressions, you or I need to be the ones to figure out am I going to talk to this person? If it's a safe environment where you and I feel safe, then one of us should bring that up in a polite, respectful way. Or we pull the person aside and just really stay focused in on the behavior. We noticed that, you made this comment and it might have been perceived as being offensive. And that's it. And that other person, when they're being called in, their response, if it truly is a microaggression, so if it's from unconscious bias, their responsibility is to hear, listen to what they're being told, to acknowledge it, to pay attention to what emotions are coming up for them, and then to apologize and then not do that again, or try not to do that again, right? That's really the only response. Because otherwise, if the person says that wasn't my intention, or I was just joking, or Sejal's being too sensitive, that's not the point. The point is, it doesn't matter what your intention is. It's still harming that other person, or potentially creating an unsafe environment for that person. So it's not about the intention, it's about the impact.
Yeah.
Right. So these deeper conversations you can only make true change or have belonging at your organization when you start having these discussions. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you make a good point about it's not intention, it's impact.
Yep.
And, and when it is unconscious, you don't even know you're doing it until you do it. And it's, and quite honestly, it's not just bias, it's personality.
Anything.
I mean, yeah, like myself, I've got I don't even say it's not aggressive, but I get things done. That's what I do. It's part of me. And people, and when we're in business situations, I have to reel myself back, because I just, as a normal part of my day, it's like, hey, we're doing this, and I'm not in somebody's face like that, but I'm there I know what I'm there to do, but I have to, in the situation, you have to take notice of the room or the people you're talking with and act appropriately in that situation. And that's not even considering anything that would be, most people would think bias. It's personality. And I think that when we talk about things and we talk about bias, it's human behavior, I think, at the core. And when we that's why to me, I think is so cool what you're doing, because it's really about when you study human behavior, you study the mind, you study the way that works, and you study the way that we can take ourselves from where we're at today, no matter where we're at today, and we can make such tremendous gains in our mind if we do it the right way, and the way that outwardly we do things. I think it's just cool what you're doing. And the approach, because you're not taking the approach of, hey, you need to do this right now, and this is the way we need to understand, so that we can civilly change the conversations, so they're productive all around. And I'm so inspired by that. And I come back to the very foundation of the United States. We came here because we wanted diversity. We wanted freedom. We wanted no freedom from oppression. I mean, you come back clear to the beginning. That's what we said. But yet we still haven't figured it out. Obviously, hopefully we're getting better. But I just love the conversations you're leading. Comes back to civility as human to human civility, and understanding, and really trying to educating and get better, because the way what you've seen is there is a lot of unconscious bias. And
so unconscious bias is just another word for preference, right? So when presented with two options, you have to prefer one thing or the other. That's just how we are, So if I were to give you two colors, it could be any color, it could be pink and green, and I said, which one do you prefer? And you automatically lean in one direction. That's your unconscious bias, right? So in any situation, it could be anything. So I'll share an example. So this was a story that I was till the very end going to include in my TEDx talk, and then I eliminated it last minute. But I think it really highlights a very important point, that it's based on our own lived experience. Our own biases are based on my own lived experiences, what I've been exposed to, right? So, I remember one of the first cases that I worked on. It was an Indian female. She claimed that she was sexually harassed by her male white supervisor. Okay. So she had, I met with her, and before I even learned much about her case, right when we first met with her, we started talking, and I realized right off the bat she had an Indian accent. And I have a negative bias associated with Indian accents, and I'm Indian. Okay. So if you didn't know that about me, and I just said to you, guess what? I had this case, Indian female, she'd been harassed, white male. Who do you think I would side with? Who do you think that I would naturally prefer? Most people would say the Indian female because I'm Indian. I was harassed, and so I might lean in that direction. Mine was the exact opposite. Why? Because my parents have accents. The reason why I was bullied and harassed was because they had accents. So now, because of that, I have a negative bias against it. And it sucks because it really impacted my relationship with my parents and people. And I have tons of people in my family that have Indian accents. And I have to be very intentional to not let that impact my relationships with people. Is that fair? No, it impacted my relationships with my own parents because of it. Now, you're not going to have that experience, so you're not going to have that. You might not have that feeling. But the point is that I recognize that. So now that I know that I have that bias, which makes no sense if you just heard it from just the factual perspective, but when you see what I've gone through in my life and how it caused me suffering in the years of my adolescence, you can understand that. Right. So this is what I meant about that paradox of bias stories. When I started working and representing management in these cases, I started seeing a lot of that going on. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, if we could just educate people on how this works and give them some tools. So you asked about earlier, some tools to help people identify what their biases are. I'll give you 3 right now. They're simple tools that everybody can use to it doesn't make you a bad person. It's just to identify your preferences, so that you can make sure when you're making these important decisions, you don't let those preferences disadvantage certain people who may not have done anything to deserve those, right? So one of the tools is really you could take a test. There's an online tool called the Implicit Association Test. I don't like calling it a test, but that's what the name they gave it to them. It's a tool, in my opinion. It's not like a pass or fail. But it's a tool that was put together by Harvard University, University of Washington, University of Virginia. A bunch of these bigwig psychologists got together and they created this tool where now you can go online. It's broken out into different sections like race, sexual orientation, age, etc. And you answer a series of questions, and then it identifies for you areas of potential bias. That's valuable information for you to know. And so I learned so much about myself when I took that I was like, whoa, I had no idea. And that's the scary part about all this, is when you start doing the work, you actually realize that your unconscious biases are often the exact opposite of your current beliefs.
Yeah.
The opposite.
That's powerful.
I'm an advocate for social justice, for diversity, and yet I've got a negative bias against Indian accents. That makes no sense, right? But that's just the reality that I live in. Right. And so implicit association test is a great place to start. It's what I love about it is that it's free. We love free. Yeah. And it's broken out into different sections. So you could do a section here. You could do another section. And then you use that information to just sort of start your own process, right? Wherever you are, we're all at different places in my journey. And then you start to question those preferences and the assumptions that you're making about people. And so one of the things I said in my TEDx talk was like, did you know that within the first 7 seconds of meeting somebody, you're making 11 judgments about that person without knowing anything about them, 11 of them. And then the scary part is then you spend the rest of your time, the entire time of your relationship, looking for information to confirm those initial judgments you made about that person. Whether or not they were true or not, you will look for evidence even if they're wrong, you're going to look for evidence to confirm those wrong assumptions that you're making. So it's very, very harmful because you're doing it without even realizing that you're doing it, right? Yeah. So implicit association test, great way to get started on understanding what your own unconscious bias. Another tool you could do, right, is to just start questioning the assumptions you're making. Pay attention to those. You see somebody and all of a sudden you have a negative or positive reaction towards them. Why? Start and question those assumptions. Instead of just being reactive, instead of just being on autopilot, ask yourself things like, why am I thinking this way? What if this would have been a male instead of a female? What if this would have been a transgender person versus a heterosexual person? Would my conclusion still be the same? And really take the time to analyze, right? So in my TEDx talk, I talk about the HAT acronym, right? But you can't apply the HAT acronym until you do the work to learn what your own biases are in the first place. So starting to pay attention and to analyze, when you're having those, you're making those initial judgments, because we're creatures of habit. We like to just keep doing the same thing. So this takes work. It's intentional. You really need to, I tell people, make some time every 2 weeks to sit down and analyze what are the interactions you're having with people on your team. Is everything going okay? Are they not? Where can there be room for improvement? And then the third tool is really, the thing about unconscious bias is they're unconscious to us. It comes out in our actions, in our body language, in our facial gestures, our hand gestures, our, whether we look at somebody, make eye contact, the tone of our voice. Mm-hmm. People around us can pick up on that, even though we may not be aware of it. So ask somebody that you trust, that'll be honest with you, that knows you, that truly cares about your well-being. Not the person and I'm not talking about the person that's going to just tell you what you want to hear. That's not going to be helpful. Yep. The person that truly cares about you, and ask them and say, hey, do you think I'm biased when I make certain decisions? And just be ready for the answer that you that you get, right? So, yeah.
Well, that's a lot about, like you said, you talked about earlier, with the person that if you are biased and don't realize it, with unconscious bias, you have to be ready for the feedback.
Yes.
I mean, you really do. You have to go. And, you just, if you are in the right frame of mind, you can do that. And that's just what I think people have to realize, is that if you're doing something you don't realize you're doing it, okay, first of all, you didn't realize you did it. So, all right, let's just go right there. You didn't realize you did it, but you did it.
Right.
So accept it, like you said, and take the feedback and apologize and move on.
Yeah. And again, you might get defensive. It's not easy to get this feedback. It's really, really hard sometimes to hear it. But if you do this right, and you create an environment, let's say if we're talking about at work, right? But look, I just had this conversation with my mother yesterday, right? My mom's visiting from Chicago, and and she made some statement, and it was a racist comment that she made. And I had to say, do you understand what you just said is extremely racist? And she did it happened twice. Like the first time she said it, I said it to her, and then it happened again. It's not comfortable. Nobody said it's easy to be able to tell your mother that she's making racist comments, but it has to happen. It has to happen. Otherwise, you're being complicit and you're allowing that to continue. We've done that for so long. And that's why we're in this mess that we're in right now, is because we've just become complicit, and we're not supporting each other, and we're not being allies the way that we should be. And we can't get there till people understand what bias is about, which is why I did that talk. Because I'm like, I need to do more to help people understand what bias is, because it's preventing us from getting to true inclusion and belonging, which is what we all want. We all want to feel like we belong, and we connect with each other.
Yes, because as we improve the inclusion and reduce the amount of bias, unconscious, just bias in general, it is going to be a much, much better place.
I hope so. I'm positive. I'm really optimistic. The only thing that scares me right now is that I feel like we're relying so much on, this past year, and this is a fear that's starting to get bigger and bigger. And I'm hoping that I can start to address it at the venture studio that I just joined. But we're relying so much on technology, and with technology, if it's garbage in, it's garbage out, you know, and that's where when I hesitate, it's because I'm scared that if there's only a few people at the top that are making these decisions, we really need to be worried about what these algorithms look like and how they're impacting our lives and all of that. So that whole part, I'm a little nervous about. We're too heavily dependent on AI right now, and it's going to be happening really quickly now. And so that's the part. Yeah.
Well, because look, let's be honest. And I'm not going to go down this road very far. So this is something I do like. I grew up in the Midwest. I like old pickup trucks, right? I like old pickup trucks. So I'm on Instagram. I find one I like. If I hit like on it, what do I see more of? I see more of old pickup trucks. And pretty soon
Mm-hmm.
I'm liking more. And what happens is that AI fills my feed with what
Yes.
I like. So this can be a good and harmless thing. Maybe I spend too much on old pickup trucks then, if that's my deal. But it's harmless in that situation. But it can be taken to very bad extremes, and people don't even realize they're going
Yeah.
down those roads because it happens over time and slowly and surely, and just increases the intensity of whatever feeling it is, whether it's good or bad, and
Mhm.
that's the thing. I think you've hit one topic, and we could spend hours on that.
Seriously. So
Because
scary.
we have to stand back from that, and we have to just understanding what that algorithm is there to do. It is there to keep you in. I don't care what platform you're on. It's there to feed you what they think you like.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to do, and that can lead you down a bad road. And
Did you
and it could,
did you see that movie Coded Bias?
no.
Oh my
Coded
God,
bias.
you got to.
Coded bias.
Okay, I would really want you to see that movie and
Yeah, all
then
right.
let me know what you think of it,
I
because that
will.
scared the pants off of me. And the other one that you should watch if you haven't seen yet is Social Dilemma. Have you seen that one?
Yes, I did see the social dilemma, and
Yeah.
it's
So
just it's like ah.
after I watched Social Dilemma, I went off of all of the other social media websites I was on. I'm only on LinkedIn right now. I went off of them. I just got on Clubhouse just because it was something that I needed to do for the new venture
Yeah,
studio that I've joined. But it scared me. But Coded Bias, after watching that fear became really real for me,
yeah,
because if you've got just a small number of people that are making these decisions on AI, and there's not much regulation around it, there's not much,
nope.
nobody's double checking all that, and it can result in a lot of disparate treatments. It already is. It's
Yes,
the
yes,
research is already there. That's
yep,
the part that I get scared about, and I'm trying to figure out how I can tap into that space, because I think from an individual perspective, I'm doing good work. Like I'm reaching people. I have more of these conversations. It's starting, but from that AI perspective, that's a whole different ballgame that needs to be cracked into.
yeah, because it doesn't really allow natural reach of news, of information, anything.
Yeah.
It artificially it's almost like a drug. It artificially feeds you what it thinks you need more of, and until it's unhealthy levels, I think.
It's
And it
already unhealthy. It's already
Yeah,
unhealthy. It's so here's an example. So my TEDx talk that I did, right? I mean, this is how it's scary. I did a TEDx talk, and there was somebody else that did a TEDx talk. Her talk was fantastic. I love the talk. So it's not about the quality of the talk. We
hmm,
both did a talk at the same event. Come out. My talk has right now, and we just look at it, and again, I'm just pointing out how AI works and how we have no control over it, right? My talk has 3,000 views, and believe me, I've worked for every single one of those views because it's everybody that I've sent there. Her talk is over 50,000 views, right? So
wow,
you think about AI, if I'm just looking at it from a perspective of how is that possible when we did the same event, the talks were released on the same exact day. And when I talked to her, because I didn't even know about that until I spoke with her, we're friends. And she's like, Sejal, I already had 15,000 views before I even got the link to my talk. So somehow the algorithm, whether it was a name, whether it was something that got triggered and it shot off, because she's like, the people that have commented on my talk, I don't even know who these people are. Versus mine, it's everybody that I'm connected to. So mine never got to the public, hers did, right? So you talk about control. You talk about what control do we have over these situations. It's not much. We can't really
no,
do anything about it. Now, the talk is one thing. I mean, I'm looking at it from, I'm going to keep doing what I do. But now
yeah,
think about somebody who's applying for a job or a loan from a bank. And now they're getting rejected because somebody didn't check the right box or use the right word, or you put down a zip code where we know there's a high racial group that lives in that zip code. So you're going to get declined, or your house is going to get appraised at twice the value. This is all machines making these decisions based on what's been fed into these machines. And these are having huge impacts on people's lives,
yeah.
right? Disparate impacts.
Yeah. Oh God, we could go down this one hard. This one could go down hard because it is. Yes, it is. It is something that we need to reel in and yes. We'll stop on that because this is. I'm so glad you brought it up though, because now I'm going to watch Coded Bias, and I will get back to you on that. And I did look at your TED Talk on YouTube before we got on earlier today, and you can tell these are people that you know that are
every single person, every single person, and I'm like. Why isn't there anybody from somebody that I don't know looking at this thing? Not one person.
Yes.
I'm like, what the
heck? Yeah. Well, it's interesting how that works. And, obviously I put a lot of videos on YouTube, and there is no rhyme or reason in my mind as how you get views or you don't. There really is none. And I don't know how it works. I don't know how it works, but you know what? I think that the good part about it is you keep bringing your message out, and I love that. I love that. I love your perspective. You have that dual-sided perspective, and you're showing people how to be aware of their unconscious bias, how to be civil, and really embrace the diversity and be inclusive as we should be in our dealings in business and in life, because it just makes, I believe if you can do this holistically, it's so much better for us. And because we all bring good stuff to the table if we can find it. So
we do, and it's about all of us. It's not about leaving anybody. I think this last year, unfortunately, words matter, and that's one of the reasons why I did the talk, was because the word bias, it was just has a negative stereotype associated with it. But our language is changing because we're realizing that we've been using language that has this one narrative to it, but it's not taking into account everybody else's narratives and lived experiences. So good things are happening, and I'm very, very optimistic that we're heading in the right direction. And I just hope that we continue to be better allies for each other, that we realize that we really need to get off the computers and do what you and I are doing right now and have these conversations and keep continuing to reach into our own networks. I truly believe if we're going to make the changes that we want, computers aren't going to help us. This technology isn't going to do that. It has to be human to human where we can control it. We can't rely on, it'd be great to get that $3 million, every 3 million people saw it situation, but we got to talk about impact in whatever way we can make it, whatever that is. And so I just want to thank you again for giving me an opportunity to be here and share this with you and whoever listens to this, because I think the more that we continue to have these conversations, the more perspectives are going to get broader and broader, and it's going to pull us all closer together. That's the goal, at least.
I couldn't have said that any better. That's so awesome, Sejal. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Sejal Thakkar. I got to tell you, if you haven't listened to her TEDx talk, get on, listen to it. It's awesome. We'll also have it in the, I didn't put it in the post yet for this, because now I think about it, I got to put it in the post too, but it'll also be in the blog page, and it'll also be in the other on our YouTube channel as well. So you can see that. Listen to her TED talk. Listen to what she does. She's got a lot of other talks she's done. Go out and practice, and get better. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sejal. We will be back again next week on The Faces of Business, talking to more interesting people about their life and business. Thank you. Bye.